The course will be in the spring 2012. It came very naturally actually for us to put together a course, and yes, put it together rather quickly. It's because most of us have been involved in the whole of the development, both in the run-up to the collapse, during the collapse, and the aftermath. And some of them were even involved in writing the report, the special investigation report written by the committee, put together by the Parliament. Yeah. And also, so you know, we were very close to the event. So and that also explains that here in Iceland, all the processes and all the kind of connections are both informal and they are even personal. So that explains this responsiveness that you very quickly take on new subject to reflect what is actually important to take on during these times. And you see, this is going to be 2012. The collapse was autumn 2008. So it is really important for us to address this issue here at the university, because the university has got the social responsibility to educate and to inform and to be able to take the events of the day and put them into both international context and also into a theoretical context in order to create learning, create knowledge about what actually took place here. And the main themes of the course is going to be, we're going to three main themes. One is the role of information, and that has to do with the information that should have been in the public domain in the run-up to the collapse, but they were not there because they had been privatized. The role of informing the population in Iceland about the national economy, about the prospects and the situation in the market, that had been left to the banks and to the rating companies and to the Chamber of Commerce, which is kind of an umbrella organization for the private companies. In 2002, the government had abolished the national economic institutes, so there were hardly any capacity or capabilities inside government machinery to produce the independent analysis the public has the right to approach. And that had been so there was very poor access to good information in the public domain. So we got the information from the banks themselves. And the other theme, the second theme, is gender and the role of gender in this. As you may have also noticed in Europe and elsewhere, in the banks and in particular in the financial departments of bank and the investment part of the bank, the majority is male. And it has been here in Iceland, when we wrote the report, when the committee appointed by the Parliament put together the research, wrote the report on the collapse, they had a gender expert on gender to look at the run-up to the collapse and the situation around the collapse and look at it with a gender perspective. So that's one aspect of the course. The third aspect of the course has to do with behavioral psychology and what kind of mechanisms are out there that really enable things like this to happen. What explained that all the people were ready to believe that the banks were fine? How come that everyone seemed to be ready to believe that there was nothing wrong? that life was easy, that here we were going to have money flowing in the economy, well, for the time to come. And how come nobody believed the warning signals coming from a few economics experts on economics here at the university, foreign experts, or foreign banks who were sending many warning signals into the media here. How come most of the public were so much ready to believe that they were wrong? So that's what the behavioral psychology theme is about.
Well, so you will find pupils that already have read about the topic. So
I would think that most people would have, if not read part of the 9-volume report. This I can't remember how many kilos, but it's many kilos. Most people would have read some part of it, or read some abstract of it in the newspapers, or listened to radio programs and television programs about the what it is that the reports were presenting. So yes, so the subject in that sense would be familiar to them. But the point about the report, it is a research committee producing a report for Parliament. So it registered the course of events, all the courses of actions, and the individuals involved, and everyone there is identified with names. So you will see the name of all the actors when you read the report. But these findings, whether it is in economics, political science, finance, ethics, whatever, sociology, this is not put into a theoretical context, and that is what the course is about. So we have a very well registered case studies out there, both in newspapers, journals, and this huge report. This is going to be material for studying at the level of academia for years to come. Because if you look at it, you've got absolutely numbers, so many case studies to pull out there and ask the question, what is it that we are looking at here? What is it in theoretical terms? What is happening here? So this is that's the role of academia.
Nice, I'm sure that will be really alive. Okay. Nice. So now we will jump to the matter of this Constitutional Assembly.
Yep.
That is here.
Yes, he's there. Yes.
It's really brilliant that it's here. The people that start today also to rewrite the Constitution is here in this cafeteria.
The head of the committee that was appointed by the government to prepare, by the Parliament to prepare the Constitutional Assembly. She just happens to be here. She's over there and she's ready to talk to you.
This is like an illustration of how close is all the points here in Iceland.
I could say, yes, okay, she's over there. She just happens to be here. She just happens to be there. You should talk to her.
They are leaving, no?
No, she will give me a sign. So we should make sure that you can talk to her. We should give her a wink and wave, hey.
Okay, so let's develop this idea of the political assembly, this new path that Icelandic population goes to work. How is the path of this constitution?
I mean, what will be the process?
The process and what's going on around.
The Constitutional Assembly, or the Council as it's called now, because after the election of the constitutional members to the Constitutional Assembly, one person that didn't get in appealed to the Supreme Court, saying that there were technicalities around the election that were wrong. And the members of the Supreme Court brought up an assessment that the election for the constitutional members to the Constitutional Assembly, that it was disqualified. So it has now taken 2 months to reconsider what to do. So now they put together a Constitutional Council instead. Okay? So now she's there ready to talk to you. She's over there.
Okay.
She just happens to be here, so why not talk to her?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. How will be this process?
Well, as the schedule, it's supposed to work on new draft or drafting a new constitution. That's the way to put it. They should be working on this now for the next 2 months. They may be able to get some extension. It depends on how they will be doing, how they will proceed. Because when you start something, you may, during the process as it progresses, you may find out you need a little bit better time to complete the draft. And then there is this issue which has already been discussed and very much emphasized by most of the members in the Constitutional Assembly, that before submitting the draft to the Parliament and have it through a parliamentary process, there is this request to get it to a national referendum, to have the people's view on the outcome of the Constitutional Assembly, on the new draft of Constitution. Why? They put a great emphasis on this because they think that that will give it a better kind of validity, give it a better strength, and give a clearer message to the elected parliamentarians, and therefore that they will be nested with better information about what the people in Iceland think about this new draft. And that will then also sort of narrow the scope, of course, for the parliamentarians to make dramatic changes to the content of the Constitution. Because actually Constitution should be based on a social contract between the people and the state. And those being elected to serve in the state as elected officials, elected by the public, they should follow the rules set out in the Constitution. And they should follow that and work in line with those constitutional rules. So the Constitution is making the framework for the politicians in which they should operate, how they should serve the people, the population of Iceland. And therefore, they are disqualified actually to be the only one to write the Constitution. But they are, after all, elected to fulfill the parliamentary role of creating laws. So nobody could actually legislate a constitution except the parliament. So, but the important thing is that the parliamentarians get enough and clear enough signal from the population. What is the framework we would like you to work within to serve the state, serve the people. So yeah, if the parliamentarians were doing this on their own, alone, they would be disqualified because they are They are designing the rules by which they should operate. And that's not how things should develop. We need more checks and balances here.
Then we will jump another time to this topic, because I will ask you, will be able to avoid economical crisis that it happens in 2008. So
this new constitution,
maybe will be able to avoid.
Well, many people think actually that it has got nothing. The collapse has got nothing to do with the constitution. That may be right, but then you have the second group of people saying, well, the constitution may not be so bad. What was bad that it was not followed. The parliamentarians, the government, they actually were not working in line or operating in line with the old constitution. And then there is the third group of people who says, well, look, this constitution doesn't reflect very much the way we think about the state and the way we think about what the state should do in terms of being the servant of the people. This constitution is not actually a contract between us, the population of Iceland, and the state. It is inherited by the Danish monarch. And when it was implemented, when it was passed and accepted as our constitution, when we declared independence in 1944, it was already acknowledged by the parliamentarians at that time, who said, many of them who said, well, okay, I will vote for this because I know this is just a preliminary constitution. This constitution will be completely overhauled and revised. But we need a constitution now in order to declare our independence. So I say yes. Many of the parliamentarians at that time, it was their notion that this was a preliminary constitution. But since then, 1944, we haven't got a new constitution. So when you get into a crisis, when you enter into a crisis like that and you become shocked, like most of the people in Iceland, it was a terrible shock for all of us. Then, like when you have a crisis at the personal level, you find out, maybe I should change something here. Maybe something fundamentally, it should be revised. Maybe we should think more carefully about how we run the country, how we run our businesses, how we run our government, how we run our private affairs or economic affairs. So something terrible must have happened, something terribly went wrong with our government, with our banks, with our finance economy. What have we been doing here, the general public in Iceland? Well, we might have been too relaxed. We might not have been strong enough, active enough to express social responsibility and sort of exercise our democratic responsibility towards government and towards the politicians. Maybe we should be more concerned. And one way of being concerned is to participate directly in fleshing out the contract by which the government should operate.
Perfect. Let's hope that this will work.
Well, yeah, the only future will tell.
Yeah.
Some people say actually, well, writing a new constitution, maybe it's just a healing process for the people. Maybe it's just a healing process. So okay, fine. If it can heal the population, help them to get through this, this experience of going through the collapse together, experience this huge disappointment, experience this, great financial and economic losses at the personal level people are experiencing in Iceland. and also helping people to go through the experience of anger. Anger because most people feel that they've been fooled. They've been fooled by their government officials, by the parliamentarians, by the government, and by the bankers. And that's an awful feeling when you feel that, well, you've been doing fine and you've been working, you're paying your taxes and you participate in society, you've been brought up to be industrious, been brought up in work ethics, which says that, well, work is something that you should always think about, you should always be able to provide for yourself. And we have created this level of social solidarity in Iceland, though, after all, for 320,000 people to be able to pay taxes and run a welfare society. And then suddenly we discovered that it has been hollowed out from within, and the bank's been robbed from within. Something that we believed, well, we were doing fine, and that this was an economy where we were diversifying from being only agricultural or fishing. Now we were going into finance and more kind of downstream industries and services from that. We had the big aluminium plants here, and well, we thought we were doing fine. Or most people thought. We had, of course, few critics, but they were not listened to. And that's an interesting issue, as I told you. That's what we are going to treat in our course. What makes almost the entire population to be willing into believing lies. And so yes, if it is a healing process, let's hope that something very constructive comes out of it and that people will become more active, more concerned about how you practice a democracy.
Yeah, more participating.
Yeah, and shoulder some part of that how you run an economy, how you run a society.
It's not. This is the people is smart. People is smart can participate in matters that before were from the government, from state issues. Yeah.
Could you repeat the question,
yeah,
please?
the people is smart.
Smart enough?
Is smart, is intelligent, and is able to participate in questions that before
yes,
was decided by the government.
This is a very interesting question, and again, I'm going to give you a very analytic answer.
Yeah.
And for probably about 20 years now, this society has been turned into a very neoliberal society in which the emphasis has been on individualism. And you are responsible for your own life, for your own welfare. Markets should take care of most things. Government should be very, very, very small, only tiny, and should be kind of a laissez-faire, reactive type of government. And during these 20 years, you can see that the level of social responsibility, the sense of society, the sense of collectiveness has decreased. So people were maybe not that concerned and interested, definitely not very much in government, because if you have a neoliberal regime, government is not good. Government is seen to be the problem, not the solution. So it should be very small, and people working in the public administration, they were seen as, well, they are just working there because they are not able, they are not smart enough to be in the business, in the private sector. That's why they are there. But the government offices being a great training ground for lawyers, for business administration, for political scientists, economists, they went in there to work in the central bank and in the ministries and in the tax office, and they got trained in all the rules from the side. And as soon as they had become skilled enough, smart enough to know the rules, the banks bought them out, offered them higher salary. there was no way for government to compete with the banks, who had already become, in the end, 10 times bigger than the economy. So you are right. You need some level of education, some level of intellectual capacity to engage in government issues. And because many of those issues dealing with public interest, dealing with equity, dealing with how to balance the various very complex goals of government. I mean, fairness, equity, efficiency, and freedom. These are 4 different goals which are competing in a way. In dealing with this and learning about how to use the tools of government in order to approach these different goals, policy goals, it needs a certain level of intellectual exercise, intellectual capacity. So, lucky enough, we have a school system in Iceland in which all the way up through university education, you have free access of education, and it's a similar education for all. There is no class division, We have comprehensive school, and people of less well-off parents, they are going into the same school as the children of well-off. So the school system has been very egalitarian, and the same can be said about the health care. Offering everyone equal access to education all the way up through the university level and health care, you offer equality of opportunity for all. And if you're interested, if you are, have the spirit to move on, and you really want to educate, you really want to move on, and you are inspired by complex issues of various kinds, you can do that in Iceland, because you have the opportunity in that. That part of the society has always been quite egalitarian, very Nordic, and that's what we brought in from the Nordic Council, because as a member of Nordic Council.
Okay, and this will be a medicine also for the angriness of the people. So I would like to jump now to the economical crisis and what you was saying us before about this responsibility, like sharing of the responsibility, like the bank, the private bank, they give a service to develop activities like.
That's what we were talking about, the role of commercial banks versus investment banks.
Yes.
And you wanted to take up the conversation we had about people not wanted to pay the debts of private firms. And I'm going to pull out the differences of a private firm and a commercial bank.
All these.
That's what you want.
Yes.
So you can ask me, help me you can help me by saying, I can hear that people are saying here that they don't want to pay the debts of private firms. And that's something that's a group of people, if you are going to vote whether you're going to pay big debts or not pay, it almost comes as natural that you pay against. You're not going to vote yes to pay high debts, and for not to mention of high debts of private firms. But the issue here is how the vote will probably fall with a very low margin between yes and no on Saturday. It looks like that in the polls. What the yes people are pointing out why we should say yes, it is because of the insurance guarantee. And the insurance guarantee has a particular role here. It's part of the agreement that we have been enjoying the EEA agreement, that we have enjoyed the free flow of money, capital, people, service and goods. And part of that agreement is that we can move firms into the economic area and do our business there. Then the issue of private firm and private banks. Then it depends on, private banks and a private firm, you may in the first instance see that there is not that much of a difference. But then you have to look at what kind of a bank. We have two different types of banks. We have investment banks and we may have commercial banks. Investment banks, they are operating more on the kind of the money market, the financial markets, and they are lending, borrowing from other banks and investment funds and hedge funds, and they are sort of in the international they don't want to have it explicitly that the insurance scheme is there to safeguard the banks because of the depositors. They rather like to have it implicit, because it has to do with the trust on one hand. People should be able to trust their commercial banks, that they can put money in the bank, and that there is a scheme that if they have a little bit of money in the bank, at least if something goes wrong, they can get their money back. That's why this is a minimum insurance guarantee, making sure that you get paid back your money up to a certain level. But if they have it explicit the other way, that that the insurance scheme is working, it's there to stay, it may affect the bankers to the direction of moral hazard, that they will be prone to take excess risk and be more kind of risk seeking if they know that if something fails, if they go wrong, okay, you have this insurance scheme and the government is going to make sure that there are money in the scheme and make sure that they will make sure that the banks won't fail. They don't want to have this too explicit, and this is because there are certain issues in interactions and human beings. It is very difficult to put into law. Something that has to do with how we relate to each other in terms of business and commerce. When it comes to at the end of the day, for a commercial bank, the fundamental issue is this issue of trust. You have to be able to trust your commercial bank. Otherwise, you're not going to put money in the bank. And if you're not putting money in a bank to save up some money, you don't have the basis for a commercial bank to operate and serve the local economy and finance by lending to businesses and firms. That's how commercial banks operate, at the real local economy. When we talk about the investment banks, okay, if they fail, we should not bail them out at all. Just let them fail. What happened here and in other places as well is that the bankers, after a legislation that was abolished in the United States, the Glass-Steagall Act, the bankers were allowed to fuzz the boundaries between investment banking and commercial banking, meaning that they could stretch their fingers into the savings of ordinary savers, take that money and put it out to the financial market, to gamble with it like in a casino. And this is because of an extreme deregulation and with a serious effect for the general public, who's actually the people who need the banks to put money into, to save money for bad times and for their holidays, for their pension and so on. So this is This is the issue about
Yeah.
investment bank and commercial banking.
Yeah. So must be ruled.
Yeah, you have to, if you have commercial banking in particular, it really needs to be properly regulated. And by the way, the Icelandic banks in discussion when we are talking about ISAVE, this is a commercial banks with ordinary, saving accounts with the ordinary people in Britain and Holland, and also charities and hospitals and various organizations which put their money into the saving accounts.
Yeah.
So yeah, of course they are regulated in a different way than the investment banks.
Yeah. This is the point. I always thought that the bank is a perfect business because the material where you work, people bring you to your door. If you work with apples, you have to go to the field, take the apples, and then sell.
Yeah.
But if you work with money, the money comes to you.
Yes.
So you
Yes.
have to visit and.
Yes, you don't have to work hard for them.
Yeah.
They're just there. And when you have the money to work for you, that's what investment banks are doing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, this is important to understand. And part of this, this is one of the fundamental issue behind the Iceland thing. And the fact that it's really important to make distinction between subsidiaries and branches. If the ISAVE banks in London and Holland were subsidiaries, they would have been regulated and monitored and supervised by the financial authorities in England and Holland. But because they were branches, meaning that the Icelandic bankers could move money freely from those branches where money was flowing in, I mean sterling and euros, money were just pouring into those accounts because they were offering very high interest rate, much higher than the bank across the street. And they could move this money to Iceland, to remember. So that's the moral side of the story. They were moving because they were running this as branches, and they wanted to run it as branches. Why? Well, because they could move the monies around and cross boundaries more easily. And I have to say, no Icelanders is happy to pay this. We just hate it. But it doesn't mean that many of us, we think we should pay it, but that's the bitter fact of it. We pay it with a very bad taste in our mouth. And that's because we think it is part of our obligation, that's part of being responsible in the community of nations, that we had signed this agreement of EEA, and we had enjoyed all the freedom coming with the EEA agreement, but we have not been forced to shoulder responsibilities that follows from that of being part of the EEA agreement, because we are not member of the European unions. Meaning that if we were members, we were participating in making decisions. We were not making any decisions. We had no influence whatsoever on the decisions made around the various rules and directives. We were just the free riders, having, this freedom of the fall, So that in itself creates a bit of a irresponsibility. You can't only take the fruits. You will always have to do some work. You have to make some effort to participate and show that you have earned the freedom that you get with the EEA agreement. Of course, I understand that people in Iceland, they have various views on this, but this is my view.
The other question, when the camera failed, can you continue with the answer?
Yeah, it was about the investment,
economic crisis and the process
and the process of the. Let's see. We were talking about, when the camera failed, we were talking about the difference between investment banking and commercial banking, and we have gone through that now.
Yes, like the social service that private banking give to the people.
Oh yeah. Yes. The point is this, that the banks that we had to bail out. First of all, these were commercial banks and they had just been privatized. Before that, they were in the public ownership. Two of them, the third one was actually a private one. The two bigger ones, they were public banks that had just been privatized in 2002. And that privatization process was a very political process. Actually, the privatization took place, to say it very bluntly and very shortly, the banks were handed over to political friends, political cronies. And they did not take bids coming from abroad because there were foreign banks interested in taking over one of the banks. But they handed that over to Icelanders, political cronies, friends of the Central Party, the Progressive Party, and friends of the Independence Party. And the friends of the Independence Party got the Landsbanki. And it's the Landsbanki who then started up the Icesave thing. So this Icesave thing has got its politics on its own. It's a hugely political issue here. It's not just a matter of, fulfilling the directives of the EEA agreement. It's a hugely political issue in Iceland related to the Independence Party and the political majority inside that party who actually handed over this bank to their cronies. And so the politics of the whole thing is it, as it turns now, that the type of politics, it's a chessboard politics. We know already now that no and yes involves both options involve a lot of uncertainty and it involves risks. We've tried, it has been tried here to go down the route of logic of consequences to have people to understand the consequences of each route. But each option, each alternative is so complex in itself that ordinary people, they just cannot follow the whole way of considering this rationally, saying to themselves, okay, if I say yes or if I say no, then you have this and this consequences A, B, C, and D, and what are the effects of these consequences, what are the risks and uncertainties involved. It's all too complex, and it's impossible. Research evidence shows that it's impossible for ordinary people to be a rational actor of this kind. So people move over to a different type of argument. It is the logic of appropriateness. And then you are concerned with questions like, well, who are we? Should we pay this? What kind of people are we? What kind of nation is this? What kind of morality is here? And it's also about fairness. Why should we pay this? Private companies, debts. So people are more now acting on more kind of emotional, moral, and sort of rules of appropriateness, more than making an informed decision. So this is a bit the situation. And when you go down the route of acting upon what you feel about the issue, if it is fair or not, then it is very easy way to start to manipulate with a group of people through political parties, to manipulate with the people and to have people to believe that this is how it is. The Brits and the Dutch, they're just enemies. These are the colonists. They're imperialists. They're just pressing the small, tiny little nation here upon the north and being very unfair to us. And we've got no friends left in Europe, and so just give it a go. Just to hell with it all. We can manage on our own, the fish, and we have the energy, and we have the agriculture, and so we can just be here on our own with the kronas. But these politicians, these are the politicians and the part of the political arena that lost during the crash. And these are the core politicians, political arena that actually were the designers of the bubble and the crash. It's just that these are the people who know what it is to be in power. And if you know what it is to be in power, you think it is hell to be without it, and you like to get your power back. And the chessboard politics that I was referring to goes like this. It's not so very much about the public interest and the public well-being and social responsibility and that of being responsible in the community of nations. No, it's got nothing to do with that. It has to do with that of doing the government in office as much damage as possible, to make sure that you can damage so much for them that they have to either leave office and you have a new election and you get the power back again to the ruling political elite that is running the politics of Icesave. Or you can do so much damage to the government and to the options for government to be able to
We were in the Icesave point.
We had just finished talking about the politics of Icesave. We have finished that.
Yeah.
You had some other questions there, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
We finished about Icesave.
Icesave, okay. Yeah, but there's a point I like to make about the Icesave thing. It's really, if you think that this Icesave issue, is he recording now? Are you recording?
Yeah.
Okay. Some people think that what is very important about this referendum on Icesave is that the people have the freedom to make a choice, that Iceland is very democratic. Yes, you could say that. But from my point of view, as an expert on policy and concerned with decision-making systems, then for the first, that when we were certainly faced with the aftermath of the crisis, we became more concerned with how do we run our country, how do we practice our democracy. Actually, we haven't been very active. And we don't have very much of a practice in doing referendums. And when the president decided to send Icesave, of all cases, to referendum, he was able to do that because we have got no rules in our constitution about what should be the criteria for having a referendum and people's vote on an issue. If we get disagreement or a level of disagreement in Parliament on the tax bill or on the budget, should we bring that to people's vote, to referendum? And when it comes to vote on finance, payments, taxation, usually people vote that off and say no. That's one thing. We have no rules about what type of issues should be issues that could be referred to the nation. So, given that, the president, because we have this constitution that has not been revised, the president has got a very wide scope to actually, he's got a huge discretion over how to practice the constitution. So he could, because maybe, I don't know, I can't tell what his intentions were, but you can say he gained lots of popularity from the public in referring this issue to the public. It was a very popularistic move on behalf of the president. But what type of issue is Icesave? It is about paying back loans, the Brits and the Dutch, to pay their depositors of the collapsed Icelandic branches. These are, first of all, extremely complex issues. They are complex in legal aspect, they are complex in financial and in terms of agreement technicalities. They are complex in economic terms because there are these issues of interest rates and the currency rates that may affect the final bill. Having decided to use the ultimate democratic instrument, which is direct government, direct democracy, direct voting. Having decided to use this democratic instrument to make a choice for the general public to make choices on very technically complex issues, and possibly end up with having this issue taken out of the hands of the elected representatives and move it into the arena of the judiciary system. Then you are using, as I tell you, I'm telling you now, that's my view, you are using the most ultimate democratic tool to vote a very important and sensitive, complex issue out of the democratic process. Because when it goes into the judiciary system, your politicians are not accountable to you anymore. You cannot go back to them and say, listen, you've done a really, really bad deal here. Now we are going to vote you out of office. When it moves into the judiciary arena, the judges, the legal population, they are not accountable to the general public. They are not voted. They are there because of meritocracy, because they were able lawyers. They had the skills and the credibilities, and they were respected lawyers. They are more accountable to other lawyers and the legal profession because it's through the collegiality that they have their standing and their credibility as lawyers and judges. They don't have democratic accountability. So that's the strange thing here about how we are practicing democracy in Iceland. So I think that's really a matter of concern. Is this the way that we are going to use this instrument of that direct democracy is, to vote things out of the democratic processes into the judiciary arena? I think it is really a matter of concern. That's something that's something, there's a paradox here now. If we want more democracy, why are we voting issues out of the democratic process then? In a way. So something strange here.
Families here in Reykjavik in Iceland now before to go this Saturday to vote.
But unfortunately, I have to tell you, as I said before, as we come closer to the voting date, at the date of referendum, it looks to me as more and more people have been struggling to stick to the logic of consequences when they are assessing the issue of Icesave. For a reason I told you before, they cannot hold out for a very long to play a rational actor. They go on into the logic of appropriateness. And this is going to be a vote casted more on emotional and moral grounds. And when you move into that territory of moral and emotions, you become a target for political manipulation. And then you wonder even more about the quality of democracy. How good is democracy when it is practiced without proper rules? Democracy is a very vulnerable thing. It needs rules to be able to be practiced properly. And we don't have those rules here on we don't have the proper procedures and rules about what kind of issues should go for a referendum. So, yeah. And you were asking about the families, unfortunately I don't think families are thinking very much about this as in terms of democracy. Well, they think it's great that they have been asked, but I don't think they have been thinking about it long enough, far enough to understand what it actually means. The picture I was giving you is a very analytic picture of this thing, and I don't think that we all of us go down that route to think about, to take the issue that far. But there is an interesting thing how I was talking about feelings and morale when people are moved into this level of arguing about Icesave. Icesave as an issue has got the similar quality, you can say, as climate change. When I think about climate change, it's very, very difficult for politicians to, in a way, keep that issue on the agenda, because the effect of climate change is somewhat far away, it's sort of diffuse, it's not very tangible, it's not very, it's not affecting you very much on a daily basis. So it's difficult to keep it on the agenda, and people forget very easily about climate change. It's just far away in the future somehow. The same thing is about Icesave and the consequences of yes or no on Saturday. We haven't felt the issue very much like we have felt our bills, and we have felt our debts piling up, and about the housing prices going down and people getting bankrupt. We are more concerned about that, but the Icesave is very diffuse, it's kind of very abstract thing, but we've been brought into this sort of storm of debating Icesave. And the way to bring it to present, to make you become concerned about Icesave for your household, is to ask you the question, are you going to have your child to pay this debt in the future? And this is a way to make Icesave become more kind of a tangible issue that you should be concerned about. And that's part of the propaganda of today, that the no group is saying, listen, in 15th and 16th centuries, children and horses were sent down to England to work in the mines, in the coal mines. Well, let's not that to be repeated. Don't put our children in slavery for Brits and the Dutch. This is a way to appeal to you, and this is a way to appeal to your, straight into your heart, to your feelings, to what you are most concerned with today. And this is possible because Icesave is kind of a diffuse issue still.
I'm low on batteries. The camera, it's still shooting, but.
Okay, let's finish with how much battery? One more question.
One more.
You cut what we have now, yeah?
Yeah.
And we follow with the last question.
Okay, go.
Oh, last question because we are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, go.
Okay. Okay. In all these matters, I would like a future referendum will be about Europe, and it seems like now Iceland is taking this way about democratic, about economics. Do you think that Iceland will fit inside the actual framework of Europe?
I do think the European identity fits better to Icelanders than the American identity. The country is sort of in the middle of the Atlantic, close to the Americans and close to Europe, but we are more Europeans and we are Europeans, even though there has been a strong push towards neoliberal ideas from the States. Part of the politics of Icesave, I was telling you about the chessboard politics and what the politics is about. The real politics behind Icesave is it's about to try to get the government out of office, try to make as much damage as possible to the government so that they cannot get the credit for recovery after the collapse. And the third is to damage the process of applying for membership of the EU. Because there is a group of people here in Iceland who just don't want the EU at all because they have too much interest in their fishing quotas, and even though that fishing is actually in the ownership of the people in Iceland, this has been handed over to just few people who can exploit the quota just as they want. And of course, these people do not want to share power or share the sovereignty with European countries. But there is also a very thin margin, and that's very interesting. If you look at referendum or polls made about the EU, and then polls made about Icesave, this is very similar. And you see very much the same people pro EU membership and that of accepting the deal of the Icesave deal, which is on the table now. Nobody's doing that happy. We are not happy about this, but we feel that we have to do this, those of us who say yes. And then you see the same group of people saying no against the EU and no against Icesave. So part of the politics behind this Icesave issue is that of do as much damage as possible to the government agenda on recovery and also on the route towards European membership. So that's my view.
Okay, last question we have, like about IMF, what IMF and international organizations have behaved in this case of Iceland, and this organization should change also about to act in this economical crisis and are unuseful in these cases.
Are they useful, you mean?
Yeah,
IMF?
Yeah.
If they have been helpful or useful, or if they have done us more damage?
Yes, it's more damage than helpful.
Well, nobody would welcome IMF. IMF is the last resort, isn't it? Last resort that you go to. But actually, if you look at it, when it came in 2008, nobody were ready to lend money to Iceland. Iceland was like a toxic waste because we had debt. It was 13 times the GDP. And nobody could think of putting money into that. The only way to get money was to get IMF in. So it was willy-nilly that we got this international organization in here. There is an interesting issue about the stay of IMF in here. And that is that through the IMF we got more nations on board to lend money to Iceland, like the Nordic countries, like it's kind of a rescue package for Iceland. The interesting thing is that IMF, after all, they have a very bad record, okay. But when they came to Iceland, they did not put the same pressure on the Icelandic government as they've done elsewhere. Like, for the first time, they accept to put capital control. For the first time, they allowed a government to have a delay in the austerity package that's cutting down public finances. You know, for the first year after the collapse, 2009, we hardly realized that we had had a collapse. I mean, in the finances, public services had not been cut dramatically. We are really going through the severe cuts now, 2 or 3 years later. It was a delayed austerity following the crisis, following the collapse. That's the first time that IMF allows anything like that to go through. But, well, I'm sure that Icelanders, nobody's happy with this, of course, but I genuinely think because of the closeness, of the proximity of politicians and the voters and the population, it is difficult to be disciplined. It's difficult to discipline and put pressure on your voters and on your population in times of this. You know, actually, honestly, it doesn't sound very good, but I do think that we needed that discipline. And we needed that discipline to come from outside. It's not to say that it is welcome, but sorry, we had one of the biggest banking collapse in world history in this tiny little country here. It said something about us that we had this bubble because we never have collapse. We never have a collapse, financial collapse, unless that you had a bubble. But what was the special about the Icelandic bubble was that it had the time to go on for such a long time. It went on and on and on and on for such a long time, and it grew bigger and bigger and bigger. And as it grew bigger, the bankers got the scope to actually hollow in the banks from inside, rub the banks from inside. They got all the time. Financiers of this kind, they should know that this is how bubble economies behave. So it says something about our ability to control our own people, to control our own affairs. There is some serious, would you say, incapacity to take on your own countrymen because you depend on them also in terms of votes and not of staying in office. So I think it is, first of all, an indication that we were unable to manage. We needed some discipline from outside. The reason I am ready to share part of the Icelandic sovereignty with the European Commission and participate then in making decisions in Europe, because I'm pro-European, is that I do think that Iceland, the governance, and Icelandic way of governance need some kind of accountability from outside, need some discipline from outside.
Okay.